Hey, it's Bryce. Before we begin this first episode, a quick heads up. This episode includes stories of trauma and adversity. Please take care as you listen, and if something hits too hard, it's okay to pause or step away. If you need support, I encourage you to reach out to a mental health resource in your area. And finally, if these stories move you, if you find something here that stays with you, please help us share them. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Fracture to Flourish, and that helps more people discover the voices at the heart of this series. All right, here's episode 1. Every day in America, thousands of children wake up to the reality that no child should ever have to face. Abuse, neglect, homes that are fractured by addiction or incarceration. And that's where the foster care system steps in. It's trying to offer stability in the chaos. At its best, foster care is meant to be a safety net, a temporary haven where children can feel safe while their families heal and rebuild. The system's goals on paper are simple. The first goal is reconciliation, giving struggling parents a chance to get help while their children are protected. Beyond this, reunification, carefully weaving families back together when it's safe to do so. And when that isn't possible, adoption, offering a permanent, loving home to children in need. But here's where the story takes a turn. What happens when none of that happens? When the system isn't a bridge, and instead becomes the only home that a young person has ever known. At 18, that home disappears. And there's a term for this. It's called aging out, a sterile, bureaucratic phrase that doesn't come close to describing the reality. For most of us, adulthood is this gradual climb. It's like learning to ride a bike with training wheels. Your parents are there, they're holding the back of the seat, running alongside you until you're steady enough to go it alone. In life, they co-sign your first apartment lease. They coach you through job interviews. They offer a familiar place to land when plans fall apart. But for 20,000 young people each year, adulthood isn't a slow, steady climb. It hits like a cliff. You're handed a folder, maybe a bus pass, a hug if you're lucky, and then the world says, good luck, whether you're ready or not. And for most foster kids, they're not ready. Imagine navigating every major life decision completely alone. From choosing a college, to handling your first heartbreak, to staring at a lease agreement that you don't understand. There's no childhood bedroom to come home to, no awkward family holidays to complain about, no one to call at 11 p.m. when the panic sets in. The realities of adulthood creep in through missed rent payments, overdrawn bank accounts, jobs that fall through before they even start, through flat tires, eviction notices, bad dates, broken hearts, but also through the small, quiet triumphs. The first time you cook dinner in your own kitchen, pass a class that you were sure you would fail, landing the job, getting the raise, signing the lease, just showing up. Most of us don't go through these moments alone. We have people who show up. A parent who Venmos you $100 with a note that says, breathe. Cheer when you get the call back or say, I'm proud of you. But for young people aging out of foster care, none of that is guaranteed. When they turn 18, they don't just graduate from high school, they age out. They're no longer wards of the state. They're expected to be adults instantly. The case closes. The support ends. No one to call when life falls apart, but also no one to call when life comes together. No one to witness the milestones, making rent 3 months in a row, getting accepted to community college, showing up to work every day. These stories aren't about pity. They're about potential. The kind that flourishes with support and withers without it. This isn't just a policy gap, it's a human one. It's what happens when we mistake independence for isolation and call it, quote-unquote, growing up. But no one gets through adulthood alone, and no one should have to try. Because those quiet, beautiful, ordinary moments, they deserve more than survival. They deserve to be seen, to be celebrated. But when we talk about aging out of foster care, we're not just talking about missed birthdays or lonely Thanksgivings. We're talking about the bare minimums of existence. Sometimes it's not just a missing support system, it's missing proof that you even exist at all. Before a young adult can start building a future, they need the basics: a birth certificate, a state ID, a social security card, things that most of us never think twice about, and things that adults really can't function without. In theory, the system is supposed to provide these documents before a young person ages out. But theory doesn't always become reality.
I was literally given a document that had all of, like, what DCS was supposed to do, like a list from the state, and not a single thing on that list was checked off. So, like, I was not given my documents when I aged out, which made it really difficult to find housing, because if you can't prove that you exist, you can't get housing.
And still, they keep going. Young people like Ella, they push forward, not because the system prepared them, but because they refuse to let it define them. Even when the odds are stacked, even when the paperwork is missing, even when the silence is deafening. They deserve more than a system that abandons them at 18, more than survival. They deserve to be seen, to be heard, to be supported, to be believed in. But here's the truth we rarely say out loud. Institutional systems and bureaucracy have a way of reducing human lives to checkboxes on a form. And in Ella's case, those unchecked boxes, they weren't just administrative oversights. They were doors being slammed shut, one after the other. While her classmates were picking out dorm room decorations, Ella was caught in a Kafkaesque nightmare, trying to prove something most of us never have to think about, that she exists. You know those dreams when you show up for a final exam completely unprepared? For young people aging out of foster care, that nightmare is real, except the test is adulthood itself, and there's no study guide, just consequences. The statistics are brutal. 1 in 4 will end up incarcerated within 2 years. Half won't find steady work, and 1 in 5 will be homeless on day 1. But here's what those numbers don't tell you. They don't capture the sound of Ella's voice when she talks about changing the system. They don't capture the light in her eyes when she describes what she wants to build, not just for herself, but for others. They don't measure the kind of courage that it takes to keep going when no one's coming to save you. I'm Bryce Butler, and for the past 6 months, I've been collecting stories. Not just stories of hardship, but of resistance, of reinvention, of young people that are standing at the edge of what the system calls aging out, and the remarkable individuals that are working to make sure that they don't have to face that edge alone. This season of Fracture to Flourish is called Aging Out. It's about what happens when the safety net disappears, but it's also about something more profound. It's about the extraordinary ways that young people like Ella are refusing to be defined by the failures of the systems that were supposed to protect them. So stay with us, because this isn't just a story of a broken system. It's a story of what happens when resilience becomes a revolution, of communities that step up when institutions step back, of young people who aren't just surviving, they're rewriting the rules of what's possible. And if you've never heard what it sounds like when someone claims their future, you're about to. In this first episode, we'll meet 3 remarkable individuals who've navigated the impossible transition from foster care to independence. Their journeys reveal both the profound systemic failures and an extraordinary human capacity to forge meaning and connection against all odds. This is Fracture to Flourish. Recently, I traveled to Nashville on a rare, snowy morning. The streets are quiet, coated in a light southern snow that shuts everything down. But here's Ella,
You can tell in Nashville, so many people just don't know.
Making her way through it all to meet me at Belmont's Innovation Labs. And there's something striking about her. This steady, assured presence that makes you forget she's barely out of her teens. Just 12 months ago, she was standing exactly where 20,000 young people find themselves every year. At this moment when childhood officially ends and the safety net, well, it just disappears.
Well, my name is Ella. I've been in Nashville since I was 14. I aged out of foster care when I turned 18, and ever since I've kind of been involved in advocacy for foster youth who are either in the system or in transition out of the system. At first, I was like, okay, I want to give the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to reach out to my 2 workers who I know are supposed to be in charge of doing this. And I'm going to be like, hey, what gives? Because, this is really important and I actually can't live my life without my documents. that's kind of where my serious anger with the system came from, because they didn't say, oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. They didn't hold themselves accountable. They were like, you're wrong, this isn't our job.
You know that moment when you're sitting in a job interview or about to sign a lease, and someone asks for your ID, your social security number, a birth certificate, those basic documents that prove, yeah, I exist. Most of us barely think twice. They're tucked away in a file drawer at our parents' house. They're easy to find, always there when we need them. But for Ella, that moment wasn't routine. It was a dead end. Now imagine this. You're 18, just stepping into adulthood, and the system that raised you, however imperfectly, is suddenly gone. No birth certificate, no social security card, no photo ID, just an empty checklist and a world that demands proof you were never given. You can't apply for housing, you can't open a bank account, you can't prove who you are because no one made sure that you have the paperwork that says you exist. For most teenagers, there's a quiet kind of safety net. Parents in the background filing away the important papers, making phone calls when things get complicated, stepping in when the fine print gets overwhelming. It's invisible until it's gone. And for youth aging out of foster care, that safety net disappears overnight. At midnight on their 18th birthday, they go from being supported to being entirely on their own. But Ella didn't stop there. Instead of letting the frustration consume her, she turned it into fuel. She started asking bigger questions. Why does it have to be this way? Who else is going through this? And then she did something extraordinary. She channeled her experience into action, working to change the very system that failed her, not just for herself, but for every young person coming up behind her, for the ones who are still out there, trying to prove that they exist.
20 days before I aged out, I wrote a foster youth bill of rights, kind of just based off of, what I saw going wrong. And also, one of my best friends and I signed up for youth in government, and we super procrastinated on it. And she was like, Ella, it's due tomorrow. What are we going to do? And I was like, oh, do I have an idea for you? And I stayed up for at least 8 hours, and I just wrote a massive foster youth bill of rights to submit, and it was just supposed to be for the project. And I was like, wait a second, what if we just actually did this? And from there, it's kind of just been my thing. The goal of the bill is to consolidate existing DCS code, some laws, and some new rights into one document that will be accessible for foster youth, caseworkers, and anyone who is involved in foster youth's lives. And the goal is twofold. One, we want foster youth to be able to identify their rights and identify rights violations, as well as know how to report them. Because I believe education is power, and the first way to stop this from happening is making sure that everyone is on the same page.
Now picture this. A 19-year-old who couldn't get her own birth certificate is now walking the halls of Tennessee State Capitol, testifying before legislators, and building coalitions. Ella has transformed her personal frustration into a movement, creating a roadmap for the very rights that she was denied. It's the kind of plot twist that you couldn't script. But then again, sometimes reality outshines fiction. But before we continue with Ella's story, I want to introduce you to someone whose journey began long before most of us have memory. Every story has a beginning, but for Mark Dussault, it began behind prison walls. His first breaths were drawn in a world of steel bars and strict routines, a world his mother inhabited while carrying him for 9 months. It wasn't just his starting point, it was a prologue that would shape the rest of his life.
So when I was born, I was born in prison. So my mother was pregnant with me when she was in prison. So she carried me all 9 months in prison, and she ended up getting out to have me. So she was on work furlough to pretty much have me. And then they let her out. And by the age of 3, she ended up going back to prison. And so that's when I was put into the system. And so I was in the system from age 3 all the way up until 17, which is unheard of. Most youth, they usually transition out of the system within 2 to 3 years. And so I was in the system my entire life. I've lived with 8 or 9 different families. I've moved a lot, different schools. I probably went to 7 different high schools, probably 14 different middle schools.
Now here's the thing about Mark's story that always gives me pause. Foster care wasn't just one chapter in his childhood. It was the structure of the entire book. Most of us can flip through our old yearbook or a box of school photos and see the timeline of our youth unfold. Different haircuts, different teachers, best friends that came and went. You can trace the rhythm of a life growing up in one place or close to it. Mark probably had some of that too. He went to school, he had photos, probably a yearbook or two. But the way he marked time was different. For him, childhood wasn't measured in grades or birthday parties or summer vacations. It was measured in moves, in goodbyes and hellos, in new caseworkers and unfamiliar bedrooms. Each year wasn't just about moving up a grade. It was about moving to a new house, a new foster parent, a new set of rules. There was no steady backdrop, no familiar walls with growth chart marks or old family photos, just this constant resetting, learning how to navigate a new place, a new family, a new version of quote-unquote home. And that's what stuck with me. Because when we talk about foster care, we often talk about services and outcomes, but we don't talk about enough what it means to grow up without continuity, what it means to carry your story across dozens of addresses without knowing where it will finally land.
Between the ages like 14 and 15, I was homeless. I was living in a homeless shelter. I've never lived in a group home per se, or at least I don't recall living in a group home. But yeah, so just different families throughout my journey, throughout my experience. And then I was just tired. Like I just felt like I was a part of a system that wasn't for me. I felt like I didn't fit in. And I think it was along the lines of like, why am I here? Why am I doing this? And I was like, is this what you really want? Like, and I'm sitting there, I'm looking at my clothes. Like my clothes are dirty. My pants are dirty. Like my pants are ripped. And I'm like looking at my shoes. I got like holes in my shoes. And I'm just like looking at my hands and I'm just looking at the people. And I realized it's just like, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. And like you thinking about like my entire life, just all these people telling you where to go, all these people telling you how to live, what to do, what you can and can't do. And I was just fed up. I was just like, I want to be in control. I want to be able to determine where I go from here. And then so I started to make small changes and things that I thought were better, you know, to the point where it was like, I didn't really know what better meant. So what I did was I just looked at everything around me and I did the complete opposite.
Imagine spending your entire childhood like you're living out of a suitcase, except there is no suitcase. For Mark, from age 3 to 17, home was a shifting concept, a carousel of foster families, homeless shelters, and schools that blurred together like scenes from a movie played super fast. Every few months brought the same ritual: pack up, move on, start over. New house rules to memorize, new faces to learn, new relationships that felt as temporary as the seasons. Imagine spending your entire childhood constantly adjusting to someone else's definition of home. For Mark, from age 3 to 17, stability was a moving target. He didn't grow up with a childhood bedroom that stayed the same or neighbors he'd known since kindergarten. Instead, his life was shaped by a steady rhythm of starts and stops. Foster homes, shelters, temporary placements, schools that blurred together, teachers whose names faded before the next report card. It wasn't just the places that changed, it was the people, the expectations, the rules. Every few months came the same routine. Pack what little you have, move again, learn a new set of house rules, figure out where you're allowed to put your things, try to remember the name of the dog, try even harder not to get too attached. Relationships often feel as temporary as the weather. Friendships interrupted. Trust on a timer. Because even when things seemed okay, there was always the possibility of starting over, again. And when that happens enough times, when you move often enough, you learn not to unpack too deeply. Not just emotionally, but literally. There's a detail that keeps coming up again and again in my conversations with young people who've grown up in the foster system, and it's the trash bag. It sounds small, but it's not. While most kids pack their belongings into brightly colored duffel bags or hand-me-down suitcases, foster youth are often given black garbage bags to carry their things. Not because anyone's trying to send a message, but that's the thing. A message gets sent anyways. When you hand a child a trash bag and tell them to pack their life inside it, you're not just moving their stuff, you're telling them, intentionally or not, that it's disposable, that they might be disposable. Clothes, school projects, stuffed animals, Whatever memories they've managed to hang on to, whatever sense of identity they've begun to form, stuffed into something designed to be thrown away. And for Mark, and for so many others, that wasn't a one-time thing. It was a recurring ritual. Pack, move, repeat. And every time, another reminder that nothing is meant to last. That detail, that trash bag, it says so much more than words ever could. Meeting Mark today, you'd never guess this was his story. He's the kind of person who commands attention in a boardroom with multiple degrees and tech companies to his name. But sitting across from him in our interview, I noticed something remarkable. He doesn't talk about his foster care experience like it's a dark chapter he's trying to forget. Instead, he's woven it into the fabric of who he is, like a skilled artisan turning rough material into something beautiful and strong. I asked Mark where his sense of determination came from.
It's a work in progress. The natural response was like, I want to survive, and no one really cared. And so it's like, I just need to figure this shit out. And that's how it felt. I think now it shows up more because I've been able to kind of like be my full self and like walk into my full identity. But I think as a kid and as a teenager, I didn't have that confidence. It was just like, I'm just tired of this, right? And whatever this is, I just don't want to be a part of it anymore. And then I think the confidence came later because I was able to see, okay, cool. Like, let me see my undergraduate peers, my graduate peers. And when we compare what it took for me to get here versus what it took for the vast majority of them to get here, I was like, oh, I'm kind of cool. Like, like there's something about me that like I need to double down on. And that like reinforced my confidence.
So at one point, when Mark and I were talking, this was before we recorded anything, we were just kind of catching up, swapping thoughts. And he said something that really stuck with me. He said he's not who he is despite everything he went through, but because of it. That just hit me. Because I think most of us, when we hear about hard circumstances, we want the narrative to be about overcoming them, right? Like he succeeded in spite of it all. But Mark flipped that. And I thought, that's important. That's something we need to sit with. So I asked him to talk a little bit more about that. And here's what he said.
I think about it like this, right? Like I told you, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, is that like when I was in high school during like the career day, the military came to my school and was recruiting. I just loved it, right? I was like, oh, I want to be a part of this. I want to commit myself to my country. I want to fight for what I believe in. Like I was super locked in. I'm still a huge advocate of my military, but I didn't actually join the military for some reasons. But you go through this like boot camp, right? You go through this very intense training to prepare you for war. And the reason why I say because of instead of despite of is because those experiences prepared me for the war that I'm calling life. And I don't even see it as war anymore. It's fun, right? Like you can have fun with this world. But I think that, for example, moving around a lot, I think the cons of that, it does create some instability in you. And I still have a little bit of that. Like still to this day, I've never lived in any one place for more than a year. But the pros of that, it gives me a ton of flexibility, right? So when I'm encountering, spaces where I feel like I have to be nimble or I have to be quick on my feet, that comes very naturally to me, right? Like when I feel like, something the world is throwing that kind of disrupts my flow, I can respond very naturally to that. Like nothing ever really throws me off my game, right? Because I've had 17 years to build up the mental fortitude to navigate some of the challenges that life presents.
You know how sometimes the hardest moments of our lives become the stories we tell with pride? Well, that's exactly what happened when Mark shared his perspective with me. Instead of seeing his years in foster care as a burden to carry, he views them as a kind of boot camp for life. It's the kind of reframing that stops you in your tracks. Here's someone who's taken what many would consider a disadvantage and turned it into a secret weapon. And honestly, it made me rethink everything I thought I knew about trauma and resilience. Here's the thing about Mark's path to finding his footing. It wasn't the kind of straight line you draw on a map. It was more like a winding road with its share of unexpected turns and detours. And when it came to college, well, that's a chapter that echoes through so many foster stories. I remember sitting down with another former foster youth who painted a vivid picture of what that journey looked like for her.
Well, actually, I went to college 2 years, like we talked about, and I racked up credit card debt, and I tried to do my own apartment thing, and that didn't work, and I dropped out of college. And I ended up going back when I was 24. And I graduated when I was 27. So still was a non-standard experience.
That phrase, non-standard experience, that really stuck with me. It sounds so clinical, but behind it is a reality that thousands of foster youth know all too well. Trying to navigate adulthood without a guide, no one to explain how credit works, no cosigner for that first apartment, no fallback when things go wrong. It's like being handed the keys to adulthood without the manual. I wanted to understand more about how those early gaps echo into adulthood, so I sat down with Heather. Her journey, from foster care to a career in cybersecurity and fraud prevention at Microsoft, it isn't just a success story. It's a window on how the system leaves its fingerprints long after the case is closed. Aging out of foster care, it's one of those moments that it kind of hits you like a sudden drop in a roller coaster. I wanted to understand what that feels like, that instant when the system's safety net disappears. Sitting across from Heather, I could see the weight of that memory still lingering in her eyes as she thought back to that pivotal moment in her life.
There is no transition plan. I'm not familiar with what they do today, but I remember I went into college and I didn't have any money and I didn't have a job. I had nowhere to go on the holidays. Think about being a college student, couch surfing during the summer or holidays because other kids go home. I tried to take control of that situation myself, and I went to get an apartment when I was 18 and try to pay my own bills and have a job so I could make my own home. That was pretty rough also. I didn't really form friendships. I lived in a lot of fear, I think, all through like middle school and high school. And I was also kind of a weird one because, other people knew that I was a foster child and there's that stigma, right? I didn't get to participate in sports and I hadn't traveled. Most of my 20s and 30s, I had an attachment disorder. I studied it. I read books about it. I researched. I started to understand that I had an attachment disorder because of my upbringing. And I think that was preventing me from having close, healthy relationships. It wasn't probably until my 30s that I really understood what it meant to actually be attached, right? And if you think about my childhood, it made sense. I never took the time to be attached. And I think they diagnosed me with some sort of attachment disorder then, I remember. But it carried on through my first marriage and well into adulthood. Detachment was a defense mechanism. So it wasn't there's a lack of trust, it was just attachment. And the other thing is the abandonment. And only until my mid-30s, I was always afraid of being abandoned. And that created some emotional challenges for me in my relationships, if I'm being honest. Makes you do crazy, strange things when you go into fight or flight and inappropriately and erroneously judging something as threatening to your safety. Like, that's the part where I say, like, your brain tells you things that aren't true and makes you behave poorly.
What strikes me most about Heather's story is that it's not just what she says, but how she says it, with a kind of raw honesty that makes you lean in closer. She's pulling back the curtain on something we rarely talk about, how those childhood wounds from foster care don't just disappear with a birthday candle on that 18th year. They stick around, like an old friend who never quite learned when to leave. I've sat with dozens of former foster youth, and there's this common thread in their stories, the way past trauma sneaks into adult life, coloring everything from how they build relationships to the careers they choose, even to how they see themselves in the mirror each morning. Sitting there, watching Heather's eyes light up with a mix of determination and hope, I had to ask her the question that had been tugging at my mind throughout our conversation. After all the obstacles, after all the closed doors, what keeps that fire burning inside? What makes someone who's faced so much adversity wake up each morning ready to take on the world?
What really motivates me is that I broke the cycle for my family. That's going to make me cry. My kids are spoiled rotten. They'll never know what it feels like to not be loved, to not have stability, like all the normal things. I feel proud of that.
You hear it in the voices first, this fierce determination that ripples through every conversation with former foster youth. Breaking the cycle, they say. And it's more than just words. It's a promise they're making not just to themselves, but to a future they can barely imagine yet. It's like watching someone plant a garden in soil they once thought was barren. When I sat down with Ella, Mark, and Heather, their stories hit me like a gust of wind, raw, powerful, and impossible to ignore. Each of them had somehow found their footing on this treacherous path out of foster care. Yet their journeys illuminate something that should alarm us all. These success stories shouldn't be the exception. They shouldn't be the lucky ones. The question facing our society today is clear. What would it take to build a system where every foster youth gets their shot at a real future? To better understand what happens when youth age out of foster care, I turned to Lance Villio, the executive director of Tennessee Governor's Faith-Based and Community Initiatives. His office works to bridge the gap between government services and community support, and a major focus of that work has been a new initiative called Every Child Tennessee.
Every Child Tennessee is an invitation for all Tennesseans to serve children, youth, and families, and specifically those three before, during, and after foster care. And so that might sound like a lot of words, but it's very intentional that we say children and youth. Youth are often forgotten, and families. We know that reunification is a big thing. And then we say before. So how do we keep kids out of the child welfare system during, while they're in that placement, and then after, whether that's they transition out, right? They age out of the foster care system. How do we support them? Or they do reunify. Are there ways that we can wrap around those families to ensure that they don't recidivate back into the child welfare system? What we quickly found was that while recruitment is a major priority, that about 50% of foster families leave within their first placement or their first year of fostering. And so you cannot have a recruitment strategy if you don't have a retention strategy. And so that has become, the second priority area. So first is recruitment, the second is retention. Our two other priority areas are foster care is never option A, right? It's option C or D. Option A is there a way we can preserve that family, if it's in the best interest of the child, to be able to keep their kids? And what are we actively doing and proactively doing to help support families to keep their children? So preservation, that's number one priority. Number two is recruitment of foster families. Number three is retention of those foster families. And then the fourth area, it's like when all the systems have failed, what happened to those kids that transition? And so that's our fourth area, is transition. And, about 10% of our kids in foster care age out of the foster care system. I would argue with anyone, this is the most vulnerable population, not just in Tennessee, but in any state. They have no family, they have no support. They've had so much trauma, they've been displaced, they've moved around from home to home, and then they're just supposed to navigate life.
To dig deeper into the data and explore meaningful, lasting solutions, Lance's office partnered with Tom Baldwin at Belmont University's Innovation Lab. After 25 years in corporate leadership roles, Tom brought his experience in systems thinking, design, and strategic innovation to one of the most complex social challenges we face, improving outcomes for youth aging out of foster care. At the heart of the Innovations Lab's work is a guiding theme around thriving children. Not just surviving the system, but building lives filled with possibility, purpose, and belonging. This partnership wasn't about a quick fix. It was about asking deeper questions, challenging assumptions, and using data, empathy, and design to imagine a better way forward for young people like Ella, Mark, and Heather.
So if you look at foster care more broadly, there's a number of different ways in which it's being looked at here in the state of Tennessee, both in terms of how do we keep families together, how do we find more foster families, and then retain those foster families in order to create enough of a safety net to handle the number of children that are coming into the system. Unfortunately, we still see a similar number of families breaking apart, which is the unfortunate statistic, and kids entering care. In the way we unpack the work that we're doing, it's as much about, looking at the human transformation as it is the systems change. And so the core of our process is to interview those that have lived experience. And so we've now spent time and had conversations with 25 or 30 youth that had been in the foster care system and now have left the system. And the first thing that we wanted to do was talk to them about what could be done to improve outcomes for you. And they gave us a list of things that they would say are the things that need to be improved, some of which are in the study, right? Access to mental health care in a format and a delivery method that works for me. Number one, so the flexibility and the coverage of service, a safe and affordable place to stay, in terms of safe and affordable housing. Those are two of the top three that we heard in the conversation. But the insight that we gained that we think is maybe the innovation opportunity was when we flipped the question and we said, but there's 20% of these youth that are somehow finding a path to, let's call it unsubsidized independence, right? They're finding a way to some level of success. And so we asked them, of those that have successfully navigated the transition, was there a common determinant, right? Or something in common? And what we started to hear really early in the conversations, which continued to manifest itself in a very strong correlation, was supportive adult relationship. Minimum of 1, but ideally somewhere between 3 and 4.
What's interesting about all of this is that we're finally admitting something that should have been obvious all along. None of us can make it through life alone. Not you, not me, and certainly not these kids who've had to grow up way too fast. For years, we've been telling them, be independent, stand on your own 2 feet. But here's the thing, that's not how the real world works. That's not how any of us actually live. Take Ella's story, for instance. When she wrote that Foster Youth Bill of Rights, she wasn't putting words on paper, she was mapping out what real support looks like. She got that it's not just about having rights written down somewhere in a dusty legal document. It's about having people in your corner, folks who show up when you need them. Because at the end of the day, that's what helps any of us succeed, having both the rules that protect and the relationships that sustain us. Sitting with these young people, hearing their stories of both struggle and triumph, I couldn't help but wonder what wisdom they'd share with others standing at that same threshold. What would they tell someone who's about to face that daunting transition from foster care to independence? When I posed this question to Ella, her response cut straight to the heart of what it means to defy expectations.
Don't let anyone bet against you. Teach them not to bet against you, because they already are, but prove them wrong. Show them that you can do anything that you want to, because I believe in you. Just know that even though there is a ceiling that we've been hitting, and even though the statistics are not great, you can defy them, and you can pave the way for other foster youth to do the same. So prove them wrong.
Don't let anyone bet against you. These aren't just words of encouragement. They're a declaration of possibility. Because here's what I've learned from spending time with these remarkable young people. When we give them a chance, when we show up for them consistently, they don't just survive. They transform the very system that once defined their limits. But as I wrapped up my conversation with Ella, Mark, and Heather, I kept coming back to something Tom shared with me. His words cut through all the statistics and policy debates, getting right to the heart of why these stories matter.
I think I was a bit taken aback by, one, the significance of the number of youth that exit the foster care system every year in the United States. That number is between 20 and 25,000. In the state of Tennessee, that number hovers roughly around 850. And then you have the statistics of 70 to 80% of those kids experiencing homelessness, unemployment, incarceration, addiction, trafficking, or pregnancy. I couldn't unhear the number. And I think that's one of the biggest opportunities in terms of creating awareness is when you think about the lifetime effects that has and some of the most significant and thorny social issues that we have, you will see a number of those kids having ties to or have come into contact with the foster care system in some way, shape, or form in the U.S.
Those numbers Tom mentions, they're not just statistics, they're stories. Stories waiting to be rewritten. And that change, it starts with understanding what happens long before that 18th birthday arrives. Next time on Fracture to Flourish.
I looked down, this is a little 4-year-old girl, and she said, and I'm going to be okay because my sister, and she pointed to this girl across the room, is with me. There's not a home in Shelby County that can take these 2 girls, and so we're going to have to separate them, and they're going to have to go so that they can sleep in a bed tonight.
By this time, I'm a full-blown heroin, fentanyl, methamphetamine junkie. I ended up prostituting. When you're homeless, you pretty much have to do whatever you have to survive.
Fracture to Flourish is a production of Access Ventures, hosted by Bryce Butler, created and written by Bryce Butler and Jacob Bozarth. Crystal Esquivel is our producer. Bailey Pendleton is our marketing manager. Cover art and design by Justin Esquivel. Editing and production by Jacob Bozarth. Additional editing and production by Pat Kicklighter, Crystal Esquivel, and Bailey Pendleton. I want to extend a special thanks to our partners at the Belmont Innovation Labs and Every Child Tennessee. You can find show notes and resources mentioned on this episode on our website, fracturetoflourish.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. Thank you for listening.